Hi everyone. Hi everyone. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Sadia. I'm the Community Outreach Officer at Maytree. So hopefully you can all see the first slide. So I'll just run you through an overview of our service, how we work, who we support, and how we support people, and then we'll have some time for questions. So we're Maytree. We're open to suicidal feelings. So why is Maytree necessary? Why does our service exist? The kind of landscape in the UK. So the latest figures that we have for the whole of the UK are from 2018, and there were 6,507 recorded suicides. So in reality, we know that those are the numbers that are recorded, but unofficially there'll be about 20 to 25% more than that. Figures for England and Wales for 2020 were released recently, but UK-wide figures are delayed because of the pandemic. For every actual suicide, for every completed suicide, there are an estimated 20 to 30 attempts, and 1 in 4 people know someone who has taken their own life, and they're therefore twice as at risk themselves. So we know that people who are bereaved by suicide are at slightly higher suicidal risk. So how did Maytree get started? So Maytree was started by 2 co-founders who were former Samaritans volunteers. So obviously Samaritans, they run an amazing, very vital service, national, very well known, very well established. But most of the work they do is over the phone, and it's anonymous and it's one-off, and you speak to people and you'll never speak to that person again. They do have a small drop-in service, so you can go to Samaritans branches face-to-face. A lot of people don't know that, but that's a very small part of what they do. It's not kind of the main, it's not the meat of what they do. So they kind of, are thinking that actually, you have people on one end of the spectrum where maybe they just need to talk to someone once or twice, and that helps alleviate some of their despair or some of their difficulties. And then you might have people on the other end of the spectrum where they might have suicidal ideation along with possibly complex mental health needs, maybe they've been in psychiatric care, maybe they've got a diagnosis, maybe they have a community mental health care team, and that's wonderful. That's also very vital. But there's a lot of people who fall in the middle, who maybe are not so far end, that they're not on either end of the spectrum, they're somewhere in the middle. And where do those people go for some in-person support? So Maytree was established in 2002 as a registered charity, and it's the only service in the UK, we think possibly in Europe, although we're not sure, that offer residential support for suicidal ideation. I should say, it's a non-medical service, it's a holistic service. We often do have contact with people's healthcare professionals, but not necessarily. We get plenty of referrals from healthcare professionals, but sometimes we get referrals from family and friends. We get a lot of people who also refer themselves. And if people don't want us to talk to their healthcare professionals, we won't. So we sit outside of those frameworks, but we definitely collaborate with them when it makes sense to. And that's not to say that it's a replacement for any of those very vital services like clinical care, medical care, psychiatric care. All of that is absolutely essential. Services do the best with what they have. It's just that, can we also bring something else to the table that offers a slightly different approach? So the name Maytree was inspired by the actual May tree, which blooms again in spring, after maybe a dark winter. So our aims are to make a significant contribution to reducing the number of lives lost to suicide. And as I said, the way that we do that is through non-medical care. We think of it as like non-medical and holistic respite for people who are in suicidal distress. And the main way that we do that is through providing listening and emotional support. The hope really is that, so the core kind of service that we offer is, people come to stay at our service for 5 days. It's a house, it's in North London, it's residential. People come to stay with us for 5 days, they can leave everything else behind. And the hope is that during that time, it might disrupt a lot of things, the kind of the cyclical suicidal thoughts, maybe disrupt some of the isolation that they've been feeling, maybe some of the distrust that they've been feeling in life, and that they might reconnect to something, while they're in our, in our service, that they might reconnect to something. And maybe it's not to say we don't think of solutions with them, it's not about planning things for them, but they may be able to reconnect with something that's an alternative to suicide. And also that they might become open to ongoing sources of help, because the stay with us is one-off, and it's not a one-step kind of thing. You don't just get rid of, suicidal ideation doesn't just go away. in a couple of days. So that's something that we also discuss with people. So what exactly do we offer? So as I mentioned, we have the core residential service. So there's a one-off stay. It's 4 nights, it's 5 days and 4 nights. And we do have what we call an assessment process. So what that means is, we spend a couple of weeks getting to know a person. We find out their situation. We really, really want to get to know exactly who they are, where they're at in, with their circumstances in life. What's brought them to this point where maybe they picked up the phone to contact us or someone else made a referral for them. How are they feeling? What are their circumstances? We want to know as much as we can so we can make a really thorough and safe assessment, of what kind of help they need. Because it may be that we can help them, but it may also be that we're not in a position to, in which case we still want to know who we can signpost them to. So, we find out, their kind of their health kind of history, do they have any diagnoses that they're living with? How long have they been having these thoughts and feelings? Have they made any suicide attempts in the past? Their circumstances, what's brought them to this point, just to really get to know them. And it's also for them to get to know us. Is this something that they're ready to do? Do they feel comfortable talking to us? How does it feel to talk about this, possibly for the first time? We are open to all adults from across the UK. So anyone at age 18 or over, as long as they can travel to the London house. I should say that next year we have plans to open a second house in Manchester. It will run the exact same way as the London house. And hopefully, we'll be able to support double the number of people. And if that's closer to them, then that's where they'll go. There's no financial cost to guests of an actual stay. Obviously, it's a charity. For them to actually come, they just turn up. They just need to be able to travel. Of course, that's not to say that there isn't a financial implication. There will be people who can't afford to take 5 days out of their life, because of the financial impact that might have. Possibly there's childcare they have to think about, or caring for anyone else. So these are all things that we have to take into consideration. And when people leave, we help put together for them longer term support. So that's drawing on what do they already have in place. Do they know who they would contact? We put together a self-care plan, not just a self-care plan, a support plan when they leave and they're on their last day. And that comprises self-care and also personal support and also professional support. So it's when they have a difficult time again, because they will have a difficult time again after they leave us, they know who to contact, they know what they're going to do. It's written down, it's like in a booklet, and they have it with them. So that's the core residential service, and that's run by a small team of staff and a huge bank of volunteers. And then outside of that core residential service, there's also things that we do that are a bit more external. So some of you might know we run 2 free levels of 2 training sessions at 2 levels. So generic kind of suicide awareness and prevention. So one is for like complete beginners, and one is for people who are not complete beginners and maybe want to build on their knowledge. And that's, we share a bit more about our model. We talk about things that services and professionals can think about. So we get a lot of healthcare professionals who come to those trainings, but not exclusively. We get a lot of privately practicing, counsellors and therapists. We'll get people who work, with people in terms of housing, unemployment, all manner of things. Because the truth is that people make disclosures in all sorts of places, and it might not be a suicide prevention service or even a mental health care service. So, it's really great for people to come and to bolster their knowledge and to find out, how do I manage this? Just to get some basic skills, so that you're managing it appropriately and safely, and then you might know what to do next. On top of that, we also do offer like bespoke trainings for teams. So sometimes people will come to those free ones because those are limited to 2 people per organization, because we want as many people to be able to come as possible. And yeah, we kind of take the time to discuss where your team is at and where you're looking to upskill. And we do that at reduced rate for charities, and we do get corporates as well sometimes. And all of that is in service of raising awareness of suicide, making it a bit more normal to talk about. There's a lot of fear, I think, around, and you find this is, it still sometimes surprises me that even in healthcare settings, people who work with vulnerable people all the time, that actually there's a lot of fear around talking about it. A lot of people can't even say the word suicide, but we can't address it or help people if we can't talk about it. And that's, very much embedded in the way that we work. So how do guests actually benefit during their time with us? So they have plenty of time. This is one of the things that we really emphasize to people, is that whole 5 days is their time, and we want them to make the most of it. Because we've spent a couple of weeks getting to know them over the phone, they would have spoken to different volunteers and staff. And what we do is that we take notes during those calls. So every time the guests meet, we call them guests. We don't call them like patients or clients, because it's very like person-centered. We don't position ourselves as these like experts. Again, it's not a medical service, not a therapeutic service. It's just like a befriending service. So we let the guests know that we're taking notes. So anytime during their stay, say throughout the day, they might have separate what we call befriending sessions. So they might spend like an hour and a half with a volunteer. Then maybe they'll have lunch. Then maybe after lunch they might have a different session with a different volunteer. But what happens is, after each of those sessions, the person will write up the notes of what they talked about, how they're feeling, and then the next person will read up on those notes before they spend time with them. So when the guest is spending time with a new person, they're not having to repeat themselves and go over their whole story again. That new volunteer or staff member knows who they are, they know what their situation is, and they're just kind of stepping in, and they're trying to pick up from where the last person left off. And we really just encourage them to talk about how they're feeling. We want them to, hopefully feel safe. It's a very cozy kind of space. It's very minimal. It's not a sterile clinical environment. It's not intimidating. We want to make it warm and welcoming. You can see this lovely illustration at the bottom is actually an illustration of our communal kitchen. And you can see in the back, there's like a nice garden area. And our hope is that people can find some sense of space, and that they can reflect and hopefully feel supported. And to rediscover some trust in other people and the positives of social contact. Because, if you are just physically isolated, which of course so many of us have been in the last year and a half anyway, but even if you were maybe around people a lot, or around enough people, if you're not able to actually express how you're feeling, it's still really exhausting. So you don't have any of the benefits of social contact, because you're not actually able to express how you're feeling and not getting the emotional support that you need. Through these sessions, we also talk about, the causes of the crisis, the roots of the suicidal ideation. And we talk about preparing for leaving, and what does their life look like? The life that they're stepping back into, what does that look like? So as I mentioned, we have a huge bank of volunteers. They now work, both in person and remotely. We had to close to residential stays during the lockdowns. We are open again now. We're open at half capacity at the moment. We do hope that eventually in time we can get back to full capacity. But obviously we have COVID protocols in place. But what we also now do is that we offer 3 weekly calls with people, just as emotional support in its own right. Whereas before the pandemic, we would only continue calls with a view to offering that person a stay, possibly. But obviously things are a bit different now. So we have volunteers who, we have some volunteers that just want to come back to the house and they feel safe and they're happy to do that. We have some that just work remotely, and we have some that do both. So we ask them to do a 3.5-hour shift every week and 1 overnight shift a month. And the people apply and we select them. So we want them to make sure they're compassionate, respectful, trustworthy. And we interview them and we train them, and we offer them ongoing support as well. I used to be a volunteer, and I really loved it. It sounds like a weird thing to say, but every time you come on shift, you have a different experience. And it's very humbling to have people talk to you, to have people open up to you, and to be able to support someone in a really dark time. Even if it's someone you'll never see them again, because it's a one-off stay. They're there for 5 days. You do 1 shift a week. You won't have that type of contact with that person again. But they're really opening up, and they show a lot of courage to turn up and to have that stay and to talk about things. The hope is that we facilitate some, I don't want to say progress, because that implies that there's kind of like you're progressing or you're not progressing, but they might just be able to just glimpse something that's, I think when people feel suicidal, it's like basically the future is just like a black hole. It's like they're just a bit lost in a vortex. But through offering people support and you're not judging them, you're completely open to whatever they have to say, you're not going to be shocked, you're not going to be scared. It allows people to just see something else. They might still see the black hole, but they might see something else as well. We support our volunteers ongoingly because they're here heavy and difficult things, and we want to make sure that they're not going to burn out and then they're not taking it home with them. So, we do have like debriefing sessions with volunteers and staff so that people can just discuss, what the shifts have been like, things they've been hearing on the phone, stuff they've heard in person, just so that they can also process it and get it off their chest, because secondary trauma is a real thing. So it's really important that everyone is supported during this work, and obviously the staff have their own support as well. Just a point about fundraising. So Maytree receives no government funding, and we have a small fundraising team that apply for grants and donations, and to big organizations that do charitable giving. We also do have obviously fundraising events, and we have lots of loyal supporters. You'll often get people who've been maybe personally touched by suicide. Will donate to us. People sometimes leave us gifts in their wills and whatnot. So that's kind of an overview. Obviously, you can follow us on socials. You can also contact me, and that's our phone number and the email address. So I'll stop the slides there because you can't see me, but there's time for questions. Before the pandemic, so we have 4 bedrooms, and so because we're only open at half capacity, we have 2 guests now at any one time. And there's always at least 2 to 3, volunteers and staff per guest. So obviously the volunteers are never alone in the house. So yeah, and actually since we've been open, we have been full, and we have been able to have people, on rotation every week. So that is good, but obviously we want to, gradually build back up to 3 and then up to maximum 4 again. And before the pandemic, we were always full.
Yeah, so the maximum of 4 every time, and that would be 4 for a week. I mean, is it
4 a week? Yeah. So what we have is guests arrive and leave on the same day. Okay. So that every week there's 2 days where we can catch up. We catch up on paperwork. We staff and volunteers run everything in the house, so cleaning, cooking, groceries, all of that. So we have 2 days to just kind of prepare for the next day. We didn't used to do it like that. I don't know how actually they managed before. They used to, I guess it was just like a revolving door. People were just coming and going on a rolling basis. And actually this makes so much more sense, because the other aspect of it to think about is there's a real trajectory, there's a journey throughout that 5 days. They have anxiety about arriving, then they have to settle in, then they kind of start to feel like, okay, I'm really here. And then they have anxiety about leaving. But when people were coming and going on different days, everyone was in such a different place. So actually there's a benefit to people coming and going on at the same time. So we definitely, we encourage them to talk about it, to talk about what they feel about leaving, what life is going to look like for them once they go. And as I mentioned, we help them put together a support plan, because they do need something tangible. Yes. So yeah, so definitely we talk about it. Yeah. It's a really good question. So obviously we're open to adults of we don't target a specific demographic, but the truth is that and I'm sure we all kind of know this from our work, is within the mental health care, women, they say women seek help more. All that means is that it's safer for women to seek help. When we look at suicide rates, they only record male and female gender wise. They don't record anything gender fluid, so that's all we have. But what we from what they record, the ratio is 3 to 1 male to female. So what does that tell us? Because actually our numbers don't reflect that. We are working on trying to increase referrals from men, but this is a trend across mental health care, psychiatric care in general, is that it tends towards white, middle class, female, and that's just the truth. And that is reflective of broader systemic problems, which is to do with how people are diagnosed, how people are listened to, how people are humanized or not humanized, in all these different ways. So, this is part of the problem, and it's difficult to talk about it without talking about the bigger context, which is that it's not okay for men to seek help. When you read information about, they'll say men don't seek help, women seek help. Well, that doesn't make sense, because men are obviously in pain. It's just that they don't know where to go. They're not given permission. So that's something that we really like to change, because really, we want people that we're helping to reflect, the the numbers, you know, of completed suicides and the most vulnerable people. But I believe in the next 2 years, the data that the ONS, so the Office of National Statistics, I mean, the data, first of all, that they collect is very limited. As I said, there's only 2 gender categories. They don't record ethnicity. Even they record age, and they 2 gender categories and region. That's pretty much it. So there's a lot more work to be done there around, you know, even just acknowledging that people are having different outcomes, and that it fits into broader patterns. So, but just to get back to just Maytree is, you know, we let guests know as well. Like, for example, if we had a female potential guest who maybe had a history of sexual, it was like a survivor of sexual violence or sexual assault, and there was maybe a male guest who was going to be arriving, we would like maybe say, just so you know, this is happening, how do you feel about this? If we can make accommodations, we always will, because obviously we want people to be safe. Like, if a woman is like, I don't want to be at a stay with other female, I only want to be there when there are other female guests, we'll always try to make that happen. And we'll also try to, like, say, volunteers and staff who are on shift. I mean, I will say our staff and volunteers are heavily female anyway, but again, that reflects broader trends in mental health care around professionals as well. So we always try to work with people, but as I said, we're open to all adults, so guests could be anyone.
In terms of when people come to stay, are there any structured activities, or it's very fluid?
No, it's a good question. So I'd say somewhere in the middle, basically. So you know, we have meal times around the same time every day, so breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it's all provided. And you know, we encourage all of the guests and volunteers to, you know, that's all at the same time. But in between that, so, you know, we'll have these like sessions, like the befriending sessions, but for sure, to start with, especially because people can be really, you know, it's hard to kind of, you know, to arrive and then suddenly just sit in a room with someone and start talking about everything. We have arts and crafts. There are like puzzles, games, there's books, there's like a couple of guitars. Also, you know, people sometimes might want to help prepare the meal with the volunteer for the next meal, because it's just a way of just like doing something. And then also you can go for walks, so they can leave the house anytime, but we ask them if they want to do something out of the house, is to take the volunteer who's with them, like with them. Essentially on every shift, a volunteer is kind of paired to a guest, so we just encourage them to take that person with them. That can be a really helpful thing, because they can sort of walk and talk without having to like look at them, you know, if they're feeling a bit, you know, a bit anxious about that. So there are definitely activities. There's also like a garden. We also provide them with journals, so if they want to journal. The only thing that we don't like, the only thing we want to avoid, we just don't want them to be in their rooms, like just sit alone in their rooms. Like, we really emphasize, like, this is your time, this is for you, like, use it, make the most of it. But other than that, there's no set schedule. Like, for each guest it will be quite different, and we'd really try to let it be led by them. So I wish I could give you more, I wish I could answer you better. Basically, we don't, so because it's one-off, we have a tiny bit of limited contact with them. So what we have is we check in with them a couple of weeks after they stay. We also send them something called a reflection letter. So all the staff and volunteers who spent time with that person, like one-on-one time, and had befriending sessions with them, when the guest leaves, we ask everyone who spent time with that person to just like write down a couple of lines, you know, of, you know, how they found their time with them, what they noticed, maybe insights. It's just a way of reflecting that the experience back to the guest. So we compile all of those different insights and we send it to them. So that's also, apart from the support plan that we put together, that's also something else that they have from their experience with us that they kind of have. It's like a physical thing. We do a check-in with them a year later, but they have to opt into that. So that's more like a survey, but they don't all opt into it. The truth is that we don't have a lot of long-term, longitudinal data on the long-term effects, because it's one-off, and that's part to do with the nature of it, because it's one-off. You know, we're not tracking people over 5 or 10 or 20 years even. And also we know that, you know, the benefits they might get from a service like this, that's not to say that it's not beneficial, but there's so many other moving parts, there's so many other aspects to a person's recovery, their general mental well-being, their general health. You know, if someone goes on to die by suicide, say 10 years after they stay with us, does that mean that our service doesn't work? You know, like, how do you quantify that? how do you quantify it? So, you know, they are allowed to write to us, and we talk about all of this before they come to stay, that we don't have ongoing contact. They are very welcome to send us letters and cards and like thank you letters, and we do sometimes get that, and people will let us know like years later, like they'll give us an update on their lives, but they know that we won't reply to that, and they know that. So yeah, I wish I could say that we have all this long-term data and we can report this, that, and the other, but no. Yeah, I hope that helps. So there's a couple of different options. So if we were going to run like a half-day training, so it'd be like 3 hours, where we kind of design training for your team, and like that's specific for you. So that's for non like corporate organizations, it's £500. So that's for like 20 to 30 people. With it being online, like we deliver all of that online now, and we have adapted that and it works really well. It could be a bit more. We probably wouldn't want more than 35 people, just because it starts to get a bit difficult to organize group work and all that kind of thing. So that's £500 for non-corporate organizations. And the other thing that we do, but this is like more like a mini offering, which is that every month we will invite services in to do a 90-minute session with maybe 20 of our volunteers on the thing that they do. So for example, you know, we had like Women's Aid come in, because a lot of our guests are survivors or have lived with abuse. So they came in, did a 90-minute session, and then we'll do a session for them of 90 minutes talking about suicide, because they might encounter suicide a lot in their work. So we do that swap, but that's only really for services where there's like a reciprocal interest, and also that's like a small mini thing that's for our volunteers. It's not like a whole team thing. So, and then also, yeah, then there's the free training that you can send a few of your team members on. That's general, but again, and I think it's really helpful. We always get really good feedback, but as I said, it's generic, so it's not all going to be relevant to you. Honestly, I don't think I could give an average age. We get people from, you know, 18, 19, all the way up to people in their 60s and 70s. You know, I can say, you know, looking at the data for people who are at the highest risk of suicide, what you see is, in the last few years, we actually have seen a spike in like under 25s. But what happens is it kind of goes down, 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 and then around midlife, so like 45 to 49, it goes way up. So people of all genders in that age group are considered quite high risk. Then it starts to go down, but then what you see really tragically is that you see a spike again towards the end of life. So around 86, 85, 86 onwards, you see another spike in actual suicide rates. So, you know, when I was a volunteer, I used to find it kind of surprising, or sometimes more upsetting, when you'd have guests who were much older. But the truth is that that's the reality, and you know, anyone can be suicidal at any age, you know. So I couldn't give you an average, but you know, we do sometimes get calls from people who are under 18, and we signpost those people on to some services that work with younger people that are really good.
Thank you.
I've just got one more question, Sadia. I know you said it's a one-off service. So yeah. Now, what if you get a client who, say, maybe came to your service, say 2 years ago, and they're at that stage where they need it again, and you know, is there an opportunity for that?
No, it's really difficult, because so we have talked about this before, you know, would we ever change a policy that, you know, say like a minimum of 3 years or 4 years, that, you know, if they haven't had contact with us, could they almost have contact again? But at the moment, it isn't something that we offer. You know, they know. Sometimes what we have is that people will start the assessment process with us. They'll realize that it's not the right time for a stay, and because it's a one-off, you know, we're very careful about going through the whole process. And then they might, you know, we might not get through the whole process of having a stay, and then they might contact us again down the line and restart that process. That's fine, because they haven't had a whole stay. But sadly, no, it's really, really tough. But this is also part of why the signposting is really important. Of course, things could change in 2 years, but it's that, you know, we are real with people that, you know, you're not going to have this 5-day stay and then suddenly feel great for the rest of your life. You know, you need to manage expectations. So, you know, we do address all of that, and that's part of why we help put the support plan together, so that at any point in the future, if they feel like they're struggling, where can they go? Because it can't be us, but where can they go? Because and it's difficult, you know, it's sort of rooted in some therapeutic work, which is, you know, how you always have a set time with therapists and stuff like that, and you can't really go over that time. But it's also that what we don't want is for them to feel dependent on us as well, because the truth is that it's not us who we're not the ones who did it. They did it for themselves. We just created the conditions and the environment. And it's sad that there aren't a lot of environments where people can feel safe. But, you know, we don't want them to keep using it as a, you know, it's not a repeat service, not a drop-in service. And we do say it's not a crisis centre. That's the other thing. Like, we're very careful about how we talk about it. Because, yeah, you know, we can't just also have the same people coming back also as well, because there's so many people to help. It varies. So I would say before the pandemic, what we would have is, you know, we were always full with our rooms, but, you know, it would always be rolling. So from the time you'd start the process of referral and then you'd have the assessment, we'd normally want to invite people within 3 weeks to come for a stay, just because, you know, you don't know what their situation is going to be in like 3 months or 6 months. Like, it's not a hotel, like we can't book people in, you know, because so much can change. So we wouldn't want to wait more than 3 weeks, normally 2 weeks. Because we've changed now, and what we had is during the time where we couldn't have any stays, we then had a backlog of people who were contacting us. So now we have a waiting list, which we never had before. So what we do now is we have the waiting list for actual stays at the moment is about 6 months. But what we do though is that we check in with people, and we offer people the 3 weekly calls, you know, in and of itself. And then we want to check back in with them later, you know, when we get to them in the waiting list. Obviously, we don't like that we have a waiting list. Obviously, we'd love to clear that, because, you know, you don't want to leave people. But again, we will always signpost people if we can't add them to the wait list, or if we add them and we'll have to come back to them. So yeah, so that's the situation at the moment. I mean, obviously, we want to check back in with them, find out what their situation is at that time. Obviously, if they, you know, if they feel like they can't wait and they need other help, then we'll always just do our best to signpost them to the best place. You know, we don't ever want to just leave someone just like a loose end, and leave them on their own. And it's just really difficult because of the limitations of the physical. You know, we are planning about getting back up to 3 guests, and then obviously back up to 4. But yeah, we're just doing our best really with the wait list. I mean, it was longer before actually, and we managed to cut it down. But we do appreciate that people's circumstances will change, and it can be quite devastating for people, because in so many other types of services, like NHS services or other types of services, there's like, you know, funding cuts and waiting lists and wait times, and we don't, you know, we'd never want that. We never want that for people. But you know, we have been impacted by the pandemic, like so many other services who do similar work. And you know, we stayed open, and actually we expanded our phone lines. So what happened during the time when we weren't having stays, we were having more phone calls than we would have had. So actually the waiting list got bigger than it would have had in normal times. So we're doing our best. And you know, also we want to let people know and be honest about managing expectations, you know, that there is a waiting list, and you know, we can't make any guarantees. I don't think that we would, because of the nature of the service, of it being residential. So there are a couple of really good suicide prevention services in London and out of London who, you know, offer befriending support and emotional support, but it's not residential. And so they are more drop-in. And that's what makes it different, because you can work with someone in that moment, but they're not in your care. So you're not worrying about all the safeguarding stuff. And I think the reason the residential, I think really the only reason you can actually do the residential care is because there's such thorough risk assessment that happens beforehand. If we have people who are too high risk, then you end up in a totally different situation. You know, if we had people coming straight from A&E services, for example, straight to our door, and or people just turned up, you know, and sometimes that happens. We used to have the address on the website. Sometimes people would just turn up, but we couldn't let them in because we just have no idea what that person's history is, the psychiatric history, the medical history, any substances. We just don't know anything about them. So I think, you know, if we had a drop-in service, that would be almost like a separate thing to the residential care. But you know, there are some good services that do that. I can also send some signposting information of other services that are drop-in that are really good. So it's really all, you know, centered around the guests. So sometimes people don't want anyone to know that they're having a stay, that they're using our service, and that's fine. If they don't want to, you know, that's absolutely up to them. We will, you know, it's always confidential. We'll never disclose, you know, if someone were to call up, if someone in their life were to call up and say, is so-and-so staying here? Like, we would never disclose that. It's all confidential. And that applies to their medical professionals as well. I will say that in actuality, most people are fine with their healthcare professionals knowing, because they want us to work together with, like, they're fine with that. Like, they can just give us a bit more information, and sometimes that helps with when we're doing the risk assessment process before they come. If we can talk to one of their healthcare professionals, that can give us a bit more information. And most, yeah, like I said, most people are happy to do that. But if they're not, that's really, that's their prerogative. You know, we'll respect that. But again, you know, we'll take into account, like, as much as we can.